want Detroit sports talk done right? Yeah! If you want it, you got it. It's Detroit sports talk with attitude. It's the Knee Jerks with Eno and Big Al.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like at this time to introduce to you one of the finest running backs in the United States of America, and our number one pick, Barry Sanders.
Here's Isaiah. Let's see what we got. All the way up. Go!
We might not be in your car or on your transistor radio, but we're bringing you the best of Detroit sports past, present, and future. It's time for the Knee Jerks with two guys who know Detroit sports. Here's Greg Eno and Al Beaton.
It's Tuesday, May 31st, 2022. It's the hottest day of the year in Michigan. I'm biding my time because at this time tomorrow, I'll be in the state of Florida. And by this time tomorrow, Greg will still probably be knee-deep in gin and tonics, but that also means it's time for the Knee Jerks Detroit Sports Talk of Eno and Big Al. I'm the Big Al of the equation, Al Beaton, longtime Detroit-based podcaster and blogger. Joining me, as always, is the man who knows a lot of things about a lot of things, Greg Eno. Greg, what's up?
Happy anniversary, Mr. Beaton. This is number 13 for us.
Yep.
We started this program around this time in 2009, and here we are. 13 years later, still kicking, still not able to talk about a Pistons playoff victory. By the way, that streak. I feel like we need to stop doing the show in order for them to win a playoff game. It seems like anymore. But be that as it may, I am Greg Eno from my WordPress Out of Bounds blog. You can read me there every week. Just Google Greg Eno Out of Bounds, and you'll find it. Today, I wrote a piece on Javi Baez, who's showing why Al Beaton did not want the Tigers to sign him with his awful plate discipline and so forth in the first third of the season. But be that as it may, no baseball talk tonight. In fact, we're only going to talk about basketball with our good friends, Coach Ray Scott, who will help us celebrate 13, and also Siddy Hall, a new addition of the program over this past year, who we've enjoyed having on with the stats guru, who brings a very different and interesting perspective to our basketball talk because of how he studies the numbers and how he comes at it, and he kind of mixes opinion with numbers, and I can tell you that he's got a really interesting take on the NBA playoffs, which I had never thought about. Well, you can listen to that as well. But it is 13 years, and I just wanted to just take time out right now and just thank Al for he's the guy that does all the technical aspect of this thing. He edits every program.
Yeah, I'm not very good at it, but I try.
And
well, thank you.
Al and I have only met each other in person once. And
right.
When I tell people that, they're just flabbergasted. Some people think we're literally in the same room when we do this. We're not.
Yeah.
I'm in north of Detroit. He's almost down by the Ohio border. And we just have we've only met one time. And that was ironically before we even started doing the podcast.
Yeah, that was back in our blogging days, way back in the day. Yeah.
Right. So here we are 13 years later, only, we rarely talk outside of the show. Not that we're not friends, but
we're friends on Facebook and we touch base, but this is where we catch up with each other is on the show.
Right. So anyway, we're happy to do it. 13 years and can't believe it's been that long. But we decided that we would in the past we've brought tons of guests on and run roughshod through them
and make my life hell.
Right. We decided we would just kind of low key this time, and we would keep it to just two guests, and both about basketball. So we'll be joined tonight by our good friend Coach Ray Scott, who we always have on our anniversary programs, and a new addition to the show.
Don't forget to mention published author Ray Scott.
Yes, absolutely. We'll talk about that. And, of course, the Siddy Hall, our NBA stats guru, who brings an interesting perspective to the game.
Yeah,
so we'll talk.
He definitely gives a different view of the playoffs. He has an interesting take on how the playoffs should be played compared to how they are now.
Right, absolutely.
Involves round robins. We'll just say that much.
We're not going to do any sort of no jerk of the week tonight. We're not going to do the birthday game. We'll just go right into our discussions. First up will be you'll hear these pre-recorded interviews. Coach Ray Scott, who, as Al mentioned, is now a published author. We'll talk about his new book. We'll talk about his thoughts on recently passed away Bob Lanier, and we'll talk about modern day game and who he likes in the NBA Finals, and then followed shortly thereafter by our talk with Siddy Hall, and who'll give a more modern view and a more of a sabermetric view, if you will, about Bob's career, and also about his take on the playoffs this year, whether the Pistons' fifth place draft pick, what he thinks about that, who he likes in the finals, and the aforementioned unusual format change he would like to employ for the NBA playoffs, which I never had thought of before. And it's going to probably blow your mind, but we'll talk about that in those pre-recorded interviews, which we'll play for you right now. Well, Al, I can't think of anybody that we would rather have on our program to celebrate 13 years than the venerable Coach Ray Scott.
Indeed.
Who has been with us since the beginning, and we always bring him on to celebrate these special occasions. We also usually have him on at least one other time during the course of the year, but especially we have to have him on now as we celebrate our 13th anniversary. And
I hear he's
now a hotshot author.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hear he's quite the big deal now. If he wasn't already, he's a bigger deal.
I'm surprised he was able to squeeze us in tonight with his busy schedule. But he was able to put the phone down for 5 minutes. He's these author types. They just can't, they get, So he's on the other end of our line. Coach, thanks for doing this, and good to talk to you again, my friend.
Well, it's so good to be with two of my really, really, really good friends, Big Al and the Gino Eno, boy. And I got to tell you, James, you are so eating like a prince, my friend. I'll tell you, I follow your wife's recipes, and I don't know what you have on her. You must have pictures or something, buddy, because you are treated like an absolute king.
Well, by the way, the lovely Mrs. Eno told me to give you her regards and her love, by the way, before we start this interview. And yes, that's true. That's why I'm now walking. I've taken to walking every morning, which is partly because of my diabetes and partly because of what you just said about the food. And I've been doing that every morning faithfully, and I feel good about myself, and I'm happy to do it. And but you're absolutely right. Mrs. Eno treats me very well, and I'm forever indebted to her, and that's why I give thanks to her every program. I wrap every show by thanking her for putting up with this nonsense every 2 weeks that she does. And again, in all seriousness, to have you back with us as we celebrate another anniversary, it's amazing how fast these things go. These things, my gosh, 13 years, but it seems like
that's amazing. That is amazing. 13 years.
In this world of podcasting now, we were among the, not that we were the first ones to ever podcast, of course, but, we were doing it before it became, cool, I guess, or before it became kind of the thing that it has become now, for sure. We were podcasting, 2009 is when we started. So, it's really, podcasting now is the thing, and everybody's got one, it seems like now. And so here we are. And, before we talk about all this author stuff, which is exciting, I want to just, we would be remiss if we didn't get your take on your friend, Bob Lanier, who passed away a few weeks ago, age 73. And I know that I'm sure you've talked to a lot of folks about Bob in their interim. So I know you're probably going to, say a lot of things you've already said to other people, but still, we're eager to get your take on when Al and I talked about him a couple weeks ago, we were just struck by his sense of ambassadorship about the game of basketball, not just what he did on the floor, of course, but what he did, frankly, after he played, after he hung up the sneakers, and was such an ambassador for the game and was such a big help to Commissioner Stern and now Commissioner Silver. And you would know more than anyone about him, being his friend, his coach. So tell us a little bit about your reflections on Bob.
Well, as his coach, I felt that with Bob we had a rare chance to bring in an earlier championship to the city in basketball, in professional basketball. And he certainly could have been and would have been the bellwether of that, except for a couple of things. And one of them was Clifford Ray completely destroying us in the 7-game series with Chicago. And that seventh game, that critical seventh game in Chicago, I thought we could have won that. And I thought that was, as an organization, that was our chance. Mm-hmm. But what we couldn't do, as we've discussed in the past, is we couldn't hold off the bellwethers of money.
Yeah.
And so when we started talking about in the off season money as opposed to commitment to going after the championship, I knew we were lost. And that was the disappointing thing about that. And Bob and Dave, the leaders, Bob and Dave and myself, we were unable to hold that off. And in fact, Dave was one of the people that held out.
Yeah.
So that that set us back. And we never quite got over that hump of looking at ourselves as a championship contending team. Because you got to see it. You have to, when I went to Virginia and Baltimore and we won our divisions because we saw ourselves in play right off the bat. We did it with Charlie Scott in Virginia and with Julius Erving. In Baltimore, we did it with Wes Unseld and Earl Monroe. And so when those leaders see that right off the bat, we're committed to being a top flight championship team, that vision doesn't get lost. But when you start out talking about the rewards before you've made the win, it just gets discombobulated, and it's so hard to get that engine back on the track. But Bob was certainly talent-wise as good as any of the big guys in the league. And remember, this was at a time when literally 50 to 60% of the big guys in the NBA were Hall of Famers.
Right.
So that was Bob's competition. And it was a hard play. It was a hard play that I recall. But the disappointing part was, I think it was self-inflicted, and we just could not hold it off. But now, you're going to like this line? But if you want to read it, if you want to know any more about it, you're going to have to read the book.
Of course.
He knows all the tricks now. You'll be saying share, subscribe before you know it. So.
Right. Now, when it comes to him as a person, though, everything you've just said, about the basketball aspect of it, certainly, Al and I were talking again a couple of weeks ago about this when the news broke, and we were just kind of talking about the team and how that we just felt like, looking back, that maybe you guys needed one more really good, and this is taking nothing away, by the way, from Curtis Rowe or Johnny Mengelt or Don Adams or George Trapp or any of those guys. We just felt like if you had one more really big star in that club, and that maybe things might have been different. It seemed to me that you were playing 2 against 5 a lot of times. I know that sounds like I'm really shredding those other guys that I mentioned, but I don't mean to. I'm just looking at the way the talent was back then, along the teams that were winning the championships, Knicks and the Bucks and so forth, and the Celtics, of course. It just seemed like you guys were just that one person away. If you could have gotten one more big star, probably a forward, on that team, that things would have been different. I know that's who cares, right? Because it's all over and done with. But that was just my impression. Do you agree with any of that, Coach, at all?
Oh, I agree. Absolutely. And also, I have to put my hat in the ring there. I was a young coach, so I didn't bring a lot of sophistication to the position. So I certainly can't look at the players without looking at myself. But I say that because in the book I talk about, I prepared for every position with Chicago. I worked into the night thinking about it, writing about it, and I had everybody, when I went back over my notes, I had everybody pretty much keynoted except one player. And that one player was Clifford Ray. I never saw Clifford play the way that he played in the 7th game against us when he replaced Tom Boerwinkle.
Mm-hmm.
And he started in place of Tom Boerwinkle. And I swear to you guys, Clifford Ray looked like he was a second coming of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The guy was making sky hooks. He was passing out of the post. He was offensive rebounding. And I'm looking on my notes. None of that was highlighted in my notes.
Right. Who is this guy? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct, Greg. It was like, who is this guy?
Right.
And I said, I'll never be caught that way again. I was not prepared for Clifford Ray. And so when we came out the next year and we played in Seattle in the playoffs, and we were playoff teams now, when we played in Seattle, we didn't prepare for Tom Boerwinkle the way that I thought we should have. We never doubled him. We never, tried to make him pick up his dribble.
Oh, you mean Tom Burleson? Tom Burleson.
Not Tom Boerwinkle.
Yeah.
Tom Burleson.
Yeah.
But Burleson, and he, we weren't chilled by Freddie Brown, or we weren't chilled by
Slick Watts.
Burleson. We were killed by. We were killed by Burleson and what's the Slick Watts.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Right.
So did I not give enough attention to those guys? Well, what attention am I going to pay to a Slick Watts, who is a 30%, 35% field goal shooter? And Burleson, they just throw him the ball when they got no place else to throw it. And all of a sudden this guy is catching the ball 10 or 15 feet from the basket and making moves and playing well. So, and then I just said, the playoffs are always, even today, the playoffs are always different because you always look for that one. I do that now when I observe. I say, who's the one guy? Who's going to be the one guy? And it's usually somebody you discount. Like Golden State right now, I don't think people are counting on Wiggins. And he's doing a great job. Every series, Wiggins is like cream. He's just risen to the top. And I said, that's the guy that the coaches aren't prepared for.
Well, we'll get to that in a second, but real quick, back to Bob real fast.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. Talk about your relationship with him after you coached him, after you retired from the NBA, after he did. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with Bob after the playing days and after the coaching days.
Well, after the playing days, when they had us together, I think Bob removed himself from my circle because he became a Milwaukee Buck.
Okay.
And I think even when he came home to Michigan to do certain things, he was still a Milwaukee Buck. So I don't think there was any real bridge between us, because one of the things that Bob wanted in Detroit, and one of the people he wanted to coach him, was his business partner, Dick Vitale. So I don't think that branch was really extended in my way, or that bridge was there. We didn't remain good friends, but we remained friendly.
I'm with you.
Yeah. So,
okay.
And I think that's just, people move on. And I think he moved on. I think it wasn't, if you recall, it wasn't pleasant with him leaving Detroit. And so I think I became one of those people that was seen on the other side of things by him.
Yeah. Well, he went through a lot of, that was the other thing we talked about. He went through a lot of, upheaval. There was always a coaching change. There was always a general manager change. There was, there was always low crowds at Cobo. They moved to the Silver Vital thing, that was a disaster. You know, and there was just a lot going on. He never found that footing.
Right.
And I know that when he left for Milwaukee, he really didn't want to go. He just felt like he had to go.
Right.
And the Bucks retired his number. Only there for 4, and they still. And that's with guys like Barr and Creef and Brian Winters, and I can list a ton of Milwaukee Bucks players that whose careers were much longer in Milwaukee, of course, than Bob's. But he had such an impression on that organization that they retired.
Yeah, particularly having had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Anything with him, frankly. But they championship there either.
Yeah, they did not. No, they did not. But they had Marcus.
Anyway. Let's talk.
Yeah,
Ray Scott, by the way, former I'm Greg Eno. I'm from the New York here, and
we're breaking up.
Marcus Johnson, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
we're talking about Scott New York. So I'm from my WordPress blog at Big Al. Can you hear?
You're breaking up a little bit.
We lose the coach?
You're breaking up a little bit, Greg, for some reason.
I can hardly hear you guys.
Wow, I'm breaking up. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're sounding a little better now.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that, Coach. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, it's okay. I was just commenting that, the Bucks didn't win a championship with Bob Lanier either, or Bob didn't win a championship with them either, frankly, but that be that as it may. Let's talk real quick about let's get into the book. You got this book out now, and I know we've in the past, in development, if you will. On that point, it's out there. And talk a little bit about it, whatever you feel like you want to share about it, how to get it, why you were just give us a preview of it, if you will.
Okay, it's pretty easy because it's on Amazon Books, and seven stories publishing, and it comes out next month on the 14th. What I did was I took my career and I paralleled it with the United States of America from 1960, from the beginning of the Kennedy years, and paralleled my career, which began in 61, to the NBA and how the NBA progressed and is progressing, by the way, and how the United States has progressed. And some of the things that the NBA used with respect to diversity, because when I came into the league, really in 61, we were just coming into integration on both parts, integrating the NBA and integrating America. And President Kennedy said at that time that he wanted to bring at that time, the title was that I want to bring the Negroes into the inclusivity of the United States, and we're going to forge new frontiers with our brethren. And he spoke to that and spoke to that activity, and that gave to a 20-year-old kid playing in the NBA with a few dollars in his pocket now, it gave me a lot of optimism. Well, as all three of us know, the planet shook in 1960s because it changed with respect to music and clothing and inclusivity, and James Brown saying, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." And that used to be things, if you said black in the old days then, you could get in a fist fight. And here's James Brown making it something of pride and something of uniting. So you put that in with the Kennedys and Dr. King and Malcolm X and Medgar Evers, all of these people doing the wonderful things that they were doing in the 60s. And the former, before they were executed or assassinated. But it was a grand time in the 60s and 70s to be American. And part of that period for me was spent in the NBA as a player and as a coach. And seeing and witnessing that growth from a platform of sports. And so it was an incredible time, and I write about it, and I write about how the HBCU colleges became more a much larger part of the NBA because they were looked upon early on, pre-Kennedy, as a somewhat subterranean group. And they came into fruition in the 60s and 70s, which was really great. And we just enjoyed it. We enjoyed it at Cobo Hall, right downtown Detroit. And so when you say with respect to Bob, I thought I was here in the 60s and 70s during the most exciting time in the history of basketball in Detroit, particularly downtown Detroit. And I know they want to get that back to those pieces. They could never have the type of feelings that we had in the 70s at Cobo Hall.
And the name of the book, the title of the book is?
The NBA in Black and White.
And how long has it been out, and how well is it doing? Not that matters necessarily.
Yeah, it's out June the 14th. The pre-sales have been good on Amazon. A lot of people have purchased it to have it delivered on that date. But I must have done okay in what we did and what we attempted to do. It's with Charlie Rosen, the guy that wrote the book for
right.
Contract another book called Boxing in Black and White.
Let's bring Big Allen. What you got for Coach Ray Scott?
I'm sorry.
No,
okay.
no problem. We were breaking up. We were breaking up a little bit there. Coach.
Yes.
Now that you've written a book, how tough was it? You know, it's. Can you give us how this kind of came all together? Who approached you to do this? Did this come kind of out of nowhere? And what was your process like?
Well, let me give you the process. And this is for married guys only. I had my speaker phone on, and I was talking to Charlie Rosen, and he was telling me, Ray, I think you should do a book. And like Mrs. Eno, Mrs. overheard the conversation. And when Mrs. Scott overheard the conversation, she said to Charlie Rosen, she said, Chaz, I've been trying to get him to write a book forever. And it started from there. And so Chaz said, well, I'll get to work on it, and I'll find the publishers, and we're going to do this book. And that's how it began. So my wife overheard it, and she started driving the truck, and that was the end of it. And so now my nickname around the house, as I've said before, is Hemingway.
It's always the wives that they have to kick the husband's butts to get things going, isn't it? It just seems like that's always the way it is.
Well,
it's the way it is around here.
now that she's not in the room, I don't have to agree with you. But okay. No, I agree. Yeah, it's.
No, I'm so glad that you did. Yeah. Oh, we are blessed. There's no question about it. I have mentioned to you in the past. I'm not at all going to take credit for this, but I know I've mentioned to you in the past. Why don't you write a book? And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever suggested that to you. So that's why I'm not going to take credit. But I'm glad that you did do it. What is if you can draw any comparisons to let's say 23-year-old today in 2022. And you see that it is now 8-year-old Ray Scott handle the NBA now as opposed to how you handled it in 1960?
I often think about it. I probably would be out of my mind because I can't imagine. Let's say I have looked at my career and I've looked at the players that have gotten paid based on what I did in my career and how the players of today are played. and I actually averaged a double-double. And so I would look at my career and say I probably would make about $10 to $15 million a year. Yeah. But I would have to have a very good agent. That's all part of what happened to the league. But when you start saying to me, you could have made $10 or $15 million a year, I cannot even imagine that. That's wealth beyond even my wildest dreams. Think about that, $10 or $15 million a year. We don't make that in a career.
Right.
And so you would have to have a really good grounding. You would have to be well-grounded by your family and friends to have that type of income. Because at some point, with a lot of guys, that money becomes throwaway money. And it's money that is gained, but it's money that is lost. And, you have to stay away from Las Vegas and the casinos and certain people and drugs and, all of that, because those are all the trappings that money gets away from you. And I think the big thing is, for most of those young guys that come out of basketball, is for them to have income that measures out to the savings and the care that you would take with that money. Because that's a lot of money. And and I'm just saying this to you guys. You're my friends. It's beyond my wildest imagination. I can't even see. You know what I mean? I can't even see having that kind of money.
Right.
And so
absolutely.
I think but the skill level, I think I could play the game. I do believe that. I do believe that I could play today. I would be. I have the acumen to pick up and learn how to play the game that they play today. But that's not the part. That doesn't frighten me. But it frightens me that I would have that type of income.
We're talking with Coach Ray Scott here on the Knee Jerks. I'm Greg Eno from my WordPress Out of Bounds blog. And Big Al Beaton is here. Let's bring Big Al back in. What you got for Ray Scott?
Yeah, just to circle back to Bob Lanier real quick, since you obviously had a relationship with him and you got to see him up close. How badly did that knee injury he suffered at St. Bonaventure affect his career? Did it keep him from, he was a Hall of Fame player anyway, but could he have been even greater without dealing with the major knee issues? Because obviously medicine was different back then.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The biggest, the knee pursued Bob all of his, not only his basketball career, it pursued him for the rest of his life. When Bob passed, he had just not too long ago had knee operations. So he was still being troubled by his knees. That pursued him for the rest of his life. And I would say I think the greatest years that Bob had with his knees in the NBA was with the Detroit Pistons in the time that I was there. That was the greatest I ever saw Bob. Bob was a quintessential NBA player. He was a throwback to hook shots. He was a modernized player with jump shots, and he was a great player because he handled the ball so well. And
to kind of follow up on that, what was it like for you having to deal when you? I'm sure you had to fight through injuries during your NBA career, in your ABA career.
Yes.
Was the pressure on you just try and play through injuries? Did you not tell doctors injuries so you continue to play? What was it like for an athlete at the elite level having to balance your health and being able to play and make money?
Well, we were all Wally Pipp. And I don't know if you know the story of Wally Pipp.
Oh, yeah.
The guy that started Lou Gehrig off. Started off the Iron Horse. Players are really because we're young, we do everything we can do to get back on the court. In my 11 years, my last 2 years, I was getting needles in my knee almost a foot long of butazolone, which is an awful drug. It's a steroid. And they give it to the horses to take the inflammation out of their knees. I took that drug for 2 years. And the doctor came to me, and I said, Doc, I want you to give me your advice, Dr. Mason. And I said, what do you think I should do? He said, Ray, if you were a mailman, I'd tell you to keep working.
Right.
But as a basketball player, I'm going to tell you, you should hang them up.
You know, I was going to add, I'm glad you said that, because as many times as you and I have spoken, and whether it's been on this program or just, off the air, if you will, I've never really asked you. It just dawned on me that I never really asked you about hanging them up, about ending. We all know when you ended your career, but I never really got into. I never really asked you if that was a decision that was kind of made for you because of the physical thing, or decided. I've written about this before about athletes. To me, the professional athlete who can decide on his own. I've had enough, and there's a lot of. Kaline's a great example. There's a lot of examples of guys who just decide. They make the decision. They decide. Well, I've had enough. And this is it for me. And they make that decision. There are a lot of other guys, though. You, Gale Sayers, you go on, Mark Frederick, who did make that decision. That decision was taken out of their hands because of their physical, liabilities. Dick Butkus is another one. So you're saying that the doctor advised you not to play. Did you fight that at all, or were you mentally and physically ready to stop playing?
I was ready to stop because I had a job waiting for me in the front office of the Virginia Squires, provided under contract by Mr. Earl Foreman, the owner of the team.
Okay.
And he said, I will make you one of my front office execs. The only job that he took me to breakfast. He said, the only job you cannot have is my job and Coach Al Bianchi. Any other job you want in this franchise, you got. And I said, well, Mr. Foreman, I would like to do the job that you would see me giving you the best support you need. And he put me in as a special rep. I went out and I made speeches, and I gave talks to community people, and sold season tickets. Because we had free organization. We had the Norfolk Scope at Old Dominion College that we played at Hampton Roads Coliseum in Richmond, Virginia. And so I worked in those areas for Mr. Foreman, and it just so happened, as I was happy, and my schedule, I would be in my office at 9 o'clock, and I was home by 3:30 in Virginia Beach, in shorts and sandals, and on the beach. I had the greatest job ever. The greatest job ever. And Earl Lloyd called and said, I need you here to help me with the team. And that's not even a second thought. I was on my way to Detroit. But I retired, obviously, because I had employment. I had a paycheck, and I was living in Virginia on the beach. And I was single.
Well, did you see yourself as a coach, though?
No.
Stop play. Okay, so you didn't see the coach thing coming then.
That hit me out of the ballpark. I never even had my eyes on anything like that. Never. Right. I was going to work in the Squire. I was going to work in the front office. I had surpassed all of that. I was like, this is cool. I can do this for another 10 or 20 years.
Coach, you played with a number of guys who did become coaches themselves. In the end, that comes to mind in my mind. who of course played for the Pistons, and you also played with him, I believe, in Baltimore. Did you see Kevin being a coach? Because he was a coach for a long time, and I'm just curious if the guys who became coaches that you saw, whether or not you thought they would be coaches.
No, we didn't. You know, it's funny, we didn't think like that. We were all, because you were all chosen by the owners. You know, that it didn't begin until maybe a few years later in the late 70s, early 80s, when Cotton Fitzsimmons and the Dick Motters, those guys started to evolve. But looking at players, you know, you might say, boy, that guy's really smart. Someday he'll be a coach. But Kevin and Johnny Egan, Gene Shue, Wes Unseld, you don't really see it. I mean, I didn't think Wes would have been a good coach, because Wes could be very demanding. But then Wes became a coach and he also became an organization president. You know, Wayne Embry, one of the nicest guys you ever met. He didn't coach, but he became a general manager and president.
Right.
So, you know, a lot of times you just don't see it coming, because those selections are really made by front office personnel. So those are people that are looking at you much more differently than you're looking at how you see yourself. I just talked to Ed Coyle's granddaughter, and she said she asked her father, Mr. Coyle, why they wanted me to be the coach of the Pistons. And he told her before he passed, and she said, I just wanted to share that with you, and I saw you were on Facebook. And it was so complimentary, and I was wondering if they were talking about me. So I don't know. I don't know what goes into management's mind when they talk about you. I mean, I remember Sparky Anderson when he was a Philadelphia Philly, and he couldn't catch a cold. You know, he was so terrible. He couldn't hit very well, but he was smart. So somebody decided, here's a smart guy. We're going to make him a manager. And the guy managed probably one of the greatest teams in all of baseball. Sparky Anderson couldn't hit, run, or throw.
Right. Well, and on the flip side of that, you got Williams, who were Hall of Fame players who were not successful. It's funny how that works out. For folks who may not know, by the way, listeners who may not know, Ed Coyle, who Ray just invoked, was the GM of the Pistons when Ray was the coach, and it was, of course, the GM of the Pistons before Ray was the coach, of course. But
you have another book in you?
I'm writing it as we speak. We were working on it today. Yes, we're right now doing a book called, and this is what Dan, the publisher, said that I want you guys to write another book. So we've been contracted to write another book called Boxing in Black and White, because as Greg, as you know, I'm a boxing aficionado.
Right.
We went all the way back today to John L. Sullivan and gentleman Jim Corbett and Ben Masterson, who I have pictures of. They were at the fight in Reno between Jim Jeffries and Jack Johnson. And I was telling my co-writer that this is important to me, that those times live in history, and what transpired in the sport of boxing, because boxing, prior to boxing, was called fighting. And then the fighters, because of the clubs that began, the boxing clubs with the Marquess of Queensberry rules, it became boxing. It became skillful and scientific. And so that's why I really pick it up in the 1900s and go through what Joe Gons and Sam Langford, what black fighters did, up to Jack Johnson, and of course all the way up to Muhammad Ali. But it's such great research because of how boxing intermingled with the English culture, the British culture, because that's really where boxing, as opposed to fighting, boxing started in England.
These author types, Al, next he'll be writing a book about soccer, then he'll be writing a book about croquet, and he'll be writing a book about lawn darts. And before we let you go, who do you like in the Celtics and Warriors?
I like the Warriors because of the class that they play with, but I do like Boston because of the grit that they play with. Mm-hmm. This is going to be a very good series, I think, because both teams built their resume on playing very good defense. Mm-hmm. And that's like that. I think it'll be like a Pistons-Bulls series.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a very tough physical series. But you don't think of Golden State as having tough guys, but they do in Looney and Draymond and Wiggins and Porter Jr. They have tough guys too. And Boston, while the Warriors can score the ball, Boston has guys that can shoot in Brown and Tatum. I'm kind of lost at where that third guy might be right now. They kind of come up with them in Horford or Williams or something like that, but they don't really have that. They don't have that guy or guys like Golden State has with Poole and Porter Jr. And Wiggins, other than Steph and Clay. So it's going to be a battle. That offense I think it's going to come to the offense of the Warriors overtaking the grit and determination of the Boston Celtics.
All right. Well, it sounds like it's going to be a rough and producing kind of one of those old-fashioned knock them down, drag them out affairs.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, but you're picking the Celtics. I couldn't tell.
No, I'm going
Warriors or Celtics? We praise both teams. Warriors. Okay.
Yeah,
we'll check back.
Yeah, the attributes of the game, I think, will flow with the Warriors.
We'll see. We're going to have our stats guru, Siddy Hall, on next. We'll talk to Siddy about Coach, thanks so much. As usual, my goodness, it's such a joy to talk to you, and I'm so.
Well, it's fun. It's fun.
Literally honored to call you a friend, and I'm literally honored that you call me a friend, and I just can't tell you how much that means to me, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, my friends. You guys be well.
Thanks, Coach.
You too now.
Talk to you soon.
Helping us celebrate 13 years of doing the Knee Jerks is a good personal friend of mine and also a recent friend of the Knee Jerks, the stats guru, Siddy Hall, who I've known for some 50 some odd years, but has been only known to the show for about a year, maybe a little less than a year. He's been joining us talking about the NBA, and he's on the other end of our line helping us celebrate 13 years. Siddy, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Greg. Great to be here. Hi, Al.
How's it going?
Going good. It's the finals. The NBA finals are arriving, so it's a holiday season for us basketball fans.
Right, absolutely. We were just talking to the coach about who he had. I'm not going to tell you who he picked, but we'll get your predictions as well. But first of all, before we get into some of the things we want to talk about with you, which is the Pistons draft position, how they're doing on the rebuild, of course, the NBA finals and so forth, I want to get your impressions on Bob Lanier, who passed away a few weeks ago. We talked to Coach. Of course, he's got his own perspective, having a personal relationship with Bob. But as a basketball fan, you and I grew up and Al too, grew up around the same time watching the NBA. Bob was probably our first, maybe first NBA Pistons star that we followed as kids. And just kind of talk about his career. I know you probably have a different perspective, probably studying his career from a statistical standpoint. But just your impressions, Siddy, overall about Bob Lanier, the player.
Well, sure, I can give you a stat answer to that because in the history of the NBA, as most people know, the numbers, the offensive numbers increased through the years. Back in like 1947 when the league started, players shot a very low field goal percentage, like in the 30s, I believe. And then, it gradually increased. But it wasn't until like around the time of the ABA-NBA merger that, numbers got more modern, the shooting numbers, the efficiencies. And, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of course, was one of those guys that put up big modern numbers. Bob Lanier did so also. He was one of the few guys, like around 1970, whose numbers were, you could drop them into today's game, and he had really good numbers. He shot the ball great. So, he was one of the pioneers, one of the leaders in terms of shooting efficiency and the way the game is looked at today.
Kind of expound about when you say that about his being on the upper echelon when it comes to shooting.
Well, sure. Back in the day, we used to measure guys by points per game, and really points per game is almost a synonym for shots taken. So it doesn't describe efficiency. And we put too much emphasis on points per game. 20 points per game made you a star, when in reality there were lots of guys who were putting up, scoring 20 plus points a game who were not efficient. So, before, it really wasn't until the 1960s that we started to see guys come, basically it was the Big O, Jerry West, Wilt Chamberlain, that triumvirate, showed up and put up modern numbers. And then there weren't many others, and then Lanier showed up and he was added to that group. And there were a sprinkling of other guys at, lower shooting volumes, so to speak. Don Nelson, for example, was one you wouldn't think of, who was a pretty efficient scorer in the 60s and 70s. But Lanier definitely was in that group. And so he deserves to have an extra star by his name just for that. Well, I was just going to say, like Dave Cowens, for instance, played during the same period. And Cowens, shot the ball poorly. He was a low 40% shooter. He had hustle points and rebounding and hard-nosed defense, But,
right.
Lanier, he was, right. He belonged in that upper echelon, up, that half tier below Kareem.
We were talking about Bob's career and how we felt like those Pistons teams that he played on, especially that 52-win team in 74, and even Coach Scott agreed with us, but we're just one player shy. I mean, and this was taking nothing away from the guys like Curtis Rowe and George Dunn, Mengele, Dot Adams, Chris Ford, etc. But there was just one guy we thought they were just stars short of really being potentially a very serious championship contender. And I just wondered, when you compare Bob against those other centers like Jabbar, we're all surrounded by better teammates. How do you use that as you kind of assess Bob's career? In other words, did he do better knowing that he didn't have that support in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, that was, that's what everyone recognized at the time. And sure, it was true. He was kind of on his own with a group of, he had Kevin Porter for a little while, and Eric Money was a kind of an underrated scorer. But, they never managed to, they put that next piece next to him. Dick Vitale tried, right, with Bob McAdoo. But it just, you could probably explain that better than I, why that didn't work. But, no one can win by themselves. We know that. It's, look at Michael Jordan. It was a long climb up that mountain, to eventually get the personnel around him that could complement him. So, it was true for Lanier. Lanier was not Kareem's equal, but again, he was a great scorer, definitely belongs in the Hall of Fame. And again, one of the few guys from that era who shot the ball and scored with modern efficiency. which in my mind is significant.
Let's now talk about the where the Pistons did the lottery. They ended up being fifth. They'll get the fifth pick overall. Some of the fan base is a little bit disappointed, but other fans are saying, look, we got the number one pick overall last year. Let's not push our luck. We're still going to get a good player. It's my contention that the important time to get the number one pick was last year. This year now with the rebuild that much further along, it's maybe not, and I still think they'll get a good player. But where do you fall on this? Are the Pistons? Can they still do something with number 5? Where do you fall in terms of what they need to do to try to keep this rebuild moving in the right?
Well, every year the media creates a narrative around the upcoming draft and the players that are going to be coming out, and that narrative begins to form like in October and November. And that narrative was chiefly Holmgren and Paolo Banchero, those were the two guys. And then eventually Jabari Smith joined that group. So for those of us, including myself, I don't watch the college game closely. I wait for the season to finish, and then I start looking at film of some of these guys and trying to form an opinion. But, when the draft lottery took place and the Pistons finished in the 5th spot, I was deeply disappointed. I wanted them to be in that top 3 because that's what I had been hearing. But after watching video of some of these players, I think they're sitting in a good spot. I think they're going to do fine.
Well, to follow up on that, Siddy, this is a draft where maybe the Pistons need to swing for the fences, especially since they're in that, since they're out of the top 3, so to speak, the 3 players you talked about. So there's a little more wide open. There's a little more guesswork as to who they may go for. And the talk is to get someone like Ivy out of Purdue, who's more of a finished product. Then you got a guy like Sharp, who really is an unknown. So do you swing for the fences, or do you think the Pistons will maybe look for the 2-year college player?
My hunch is that nobody really knows who's going where.
Yeah.
I don't think we know who's going number 1. I don't think we know who's going number 2. And I think we could be in for some shock for, who knows, maybe Chet Holmgren drops to 5.
That's possible.
It's not impossible. He's really skinny. Guys with his build do not have great track records for durability. Mm-hmm. I would be really nervous about taking him with one of those top picks, So if if I'm right, then who's going in those spots? It's the guys you're talking about, So, but let's just, play what if. Let's say the top 3 go in the order as previously discussed. I'm not convinced that's going to happen, but that would be Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, Paolo Banchero would be your top 3 in whatever order.
Right. Meaning
that Detroit would be in line for potentially Jaden Ivey or Shaedon Sharp, as you said. Keegan Murray's name is floating around in that spot. And in my opinion, if they draft one of those 3 guys, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay with those guys, In fact, it might be a good year to be in the 5 spot. I don't know if you look at the track records of drafts, we don't know where the stars are going to be. And, we all know about Giannis and Kawhi Leonard. Jokic was a 2nd rounder. Rudy Gobert was a late 1st rounder. These guys, the future stars, can land anywhere.
Yeah, if you did a redraft of 2019, both Sadiq Bey and Beef Stew would probably go top 10 rather than they went low in the teens instead. I mean, you're right that an impact player can be found anywhere if you do your homework.
Yeah, do your homework, get lucky. I mean, I guess there's some luck involved. I mean, no one has that. No one's clairvoyant on these things. But just my opinion, again, I'm still looking at tape and trying to figure these things out. But I wouldn't mind if the Pistons ended up with Shaedon Sharp.
Yeah.
The pride of London, Ontario. And he is
the
kind of an
pick. That would be the upside.
He's the X factor. We don't know who he is. He didn't play in college. Mm-hmm. So, but, it makes him a little bit harder to evaluate. But all these guys are hard to evaluate. They're all developing, Holmgren, of course, is developing. Jabari Smith is developing. Ranchero looks like a little bit more physically developed, like an NBA player, but you don't really know what you're getting,
Yeah, it was funny because I joked with Greg when I said, "Oh my God, the Pistons may have to take a 2-year college player." Oh my God, when that's just how weird the draft has become.
Murray, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, the way I look at the draft, if you want the most conservative pick, if you want to play it safe, if you got the number 1 pick, I would go with Jabari Smith. But he doesn't really play like with a bounce in his step, or with a lot of energy, it's not clear that he's going to turn into an alpha type guy, aircraft carrier. So maybe, it's wrong to look at it in terms of trying to hit the home run. You're just trying to get a guy that can make an impact. If you can draft another Sadiq Bey at number 5, you do it. Yeah. That's value,
Maybe another way to look at this is if you look at the draft class, who would you handicap, Siddy, as being the most likely to win the Rookie of the Year award?
Oh boy, that's a tough question. I don't even know who a lot of these guys are yet. I'm just looking at the guys at the top of the draft. Mm-hmm. So the guy who's most ready to step in is Paolo Banchero, Mm-hmm. So I guess I would go with him. Mm-hmm. He looks like a guy who can play NBA basketball right now. But is he going to be a star? That's a different question. A lot of the years do not become stars.
Well, right, and look at a guy like Zion Williamson, who, of course, was so heralded when he came out of Duke, but yet he's been, through no fault of his own, has been through so much turmoil down there in New Orleans with coaching changes and all sorts of stuff. He hasn't found any sort of consistency, even with his own coach. He's got it for years. So that goes into it as well. Like the Pistons, of course, don't have that problem because I think Dwayne Casey's going to be around for a little while.
That's right. Well, first of all, Zion Williamson is, in my mind, a superstar. Mm-hmm. He just has to stay healthy. He's like a first-team all-star caliber player. But, you look at a guy like Giannis. Giannis went, 15th. And his first year in the league, he received 1 third-place vote in the all-rookie team balloting. So this is a guy who, or maybe it was, Rookie of the Year, but, he got 1 third-place vote. He was a slow development. So, you got to look at it, for the long term. What's this guy going to look like in 4 years or 6 years? And that's really hard to project.
Gone are the days where you and I started following them. You kind of knew who they were. They entered the league when they were 22, for God's sakes. And now you're right. There's so many unknowns anymore. Guys like Kyle Macy, who I swear to God played at Kentucky for 7 years. I swear to God.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, it was a lot easier to forecast when guys entered the league at 22. That's for sure. And that's why today, you got to be careful about tossing away your draft picks. Those late first rounders, those second rounders have value. You don't know, you might strike gold.
Right. Al mentioned Bay and Stewart, late in terms of where they might be drafted. Now, let's talk about the playoffs. The finals are set. We got the Celtics and the Warriors. And before we get into who you're picking in the finals, just give us your impressions about the playoffs so far. There's been a lot of interesting series. A couple of teams won Game 7s on the road and so forth. Just kind of tell us about your impressions of the playoffs.
It's been okay. It's been pretty good. I'm going to go off the deep end here and make a radical statement. I want to see the playoff format changed. I'm tired of best of 7. I think it's antiquated. I think it was made for baseball. And I think it makes the playoffs worse than it can be. I think the playoffs could be better. I don't, think about regular season. I hate when teams play back-to-backs. I don't want to see Detroit play the same team 2 games in a row. Why are we watching these teams play each other over and over and over 600 possessions each way, 700 possessions each way with a short bench. It's so redundant. It can be a lot better. And I would like to see the playoffs changed in the sense that when you seed the teams 1 through 8, you put teams 1, 4, 5, and 8 in one group and let them play round robins. Top 2 teams emerge and move on. And then 2, 3, 6, and 7 form another group. Kind of a little bit more like the tables you see in World Cup play. And so you don't get that redundancy. So imagine if in the Eastern Conference, if you had 4 teams were Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, and Miami, and they're all just taking turns playing each other. And then like the top 2 teams meet for the conference finals, best of 3. I think that would be a lot more interesting. And I say that also because during the regular season, in my opinion, you can turn on almost any game, and even the Houston and Detroit and Orlando, you can put out the teams at the bottom of the barrel. You're going to see good action. You're going to see good play. You're going to see cool action. And in the NBA playoffs, the game gets gummed up. They've seen too much of each other. And so in that sense, I don't feel like I'm watching the greatest basketball that's possible. It's okay. It's decent theater, but it could be, I think it could be better.
Wow. I never thought of that. Of course, that'll never happen because I'm sure it's a money issue. You don't make as much, probably make as much money off of that kind of a format, but that is interesting as hell. To think about.
Well, you could have the same number of games. Wow. You can make the money. You got to have the same number of games, and it has to be, I guess, understandable for the fans. Maybe they play each other twice. You have 4 teams play each other twice, home and away. Is rotating games. That would be exciting.
So they're kind of like an Olympic format then, kind of like how they do in the Olympics then. In a medal.
Yeah, World Cup. The World Cup has tables. World Cup soccer, they have tables, 8 tables, 4 teams, and they play each other once. But in the NBA, you play each other twice. I don't know how do you do it exactly. I don't to make it work, but I just think that would be it would produce better basketball. I don't think we're watching great basketball every night.
Now, but where would you play these games, though? I mean, how would you determine which to play in the arena?
Well, it'd be home and away. You have 4 teams. Milwaukee would play at Philly, and Miami would play, Boston, and then they rotate and switch opponents, and each team plays the other team twice, home and away. You end up playing like 6 games, right? If you had 4 teams, 4 teams play the other 3 teams twice, 6 games. 3 at home, 3 away, something like that. I'd start with that. Maybe there's other details you have to figure out.
Interesting. We're talking with our stats guru, Siddy Hall, our NBA and Pistons guru here on the Knee Jerks. I'm Greg, my WordPress Out of Bounds blog. And Big Al is here, and we're bringing Big Al in right now. What you got?
Well, we have the NBA Finals on tap. I believe they start Thursday. The Celtics were one missed Jimmy Butler three-pointer away from absolutely gagging away a Game 7, a game that they had on hand on the road and barely hung on to win. And then on the other side, you have the Warriors, who handled Dallas fairly handily. I think it was a 4-2. They ended up winning the series 4-2, and they are looking like very much the juggernaut they were maybe 3-4 years ago. So, where do you fall on who do you like in the upcoming NBA Finals?
Wow, Al, we have different takes on that. If I may, my take is that Golden State had an easy path. Yeah. Ja Morant was out for 3 games. They avoided Phoenix, and they're playing well. They went 12-4. So 12-4 is always a good record, regardless of who you play. And then Boston went through a really difficult path. They had to play Brooklyn in the first round. They swept them. They had to play the defending champs Milwaukee, beat them in 7. And then the Miami, Kyle Lowry started flopping around, and the refs bought it, allowed Miami to stay in the game. By the way, I mean, if Jimmy Butler makes the three, Boston would have gotten the ball back for a final possession, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying. They almost,
they were up like
lost,
double digits.
They had a solid lead.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
People are saying how good the Warriors are looking, which I just said, but you make a great point saying they had, compared to the Celtics, their route to the finals was far easier. That's something I really didn't consider till you just brought it up. That's a great point.
Night and day.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
Yeah, because I think we're so used to the East being considered worse than the West. I think we're finally seeing that shift happen where now the West is getting worse and the East is getting better. It just took quite a few years for that to happen.
Yeah, I think technically the West win-loss record was technically better, but the East had 10 teams above 500,
right.
So it seemed like they had more going on towards the top. And again, by, Golden State avoiding Phoenix, I mean, come on. That was
where do you fall in that series? What happened to Phoenix? They were the number one seed coming in, and a number one seed to go out that early is always a huge upset in the NBA.
Yeah, well, the two things I would look at, Dallas, like in the middle of the season, they kind of turned into the slow grinding team that was winning with their defense. And Phoenix at the same time, maybe like the last 10 or 15 games of the year, they started to flatten out. They had various guys go out of the lineup. Chris Paul went out. Cameron Johnson went out. A couple of other guys. And they just lost their mojo. It's one of those things that's hard to explain. They just were not at their peak when they went into the playoffs. And then Dallas grinded on them, But, Dallas is they're not a great team, They're just,
they have a great player.
Okay.
And
they're okay, but when you look at their talent, it's nothing special.
So who do you got in the finals? Who's your favorite?
It's a very tough finals to evaluate. It is pretty evenly matched. I have noticed that Vegas is leaning towards Golden State. I was surprised to see they had home court. And in my mind, I think of Boston as having a better season. But again, they're dealing with the Eastern Conference. But the second half of the season, Boston was viewed as being the league's best team.
Right.
But then they do have the problem of Robert Williams III, their starting center, had a partially torn MCL, I believe, and he's trying to play on it, and he looks horrible. He looks like a big man out of the 70s, and those guys limp up and down the floor when they didn't know. I don't even know why Boston's using him, some years ago, the other Isaiah Thomas, he had a hip injury late in the season, and he continued playing for Boston and basically ruined his career. And when I look at Robert Williams III, I wonder, why are you using this guy? So, Boston but they know that's a tough break for Boston. They got to try and win with a guy playing, 50%. But anyway, a lot of interesting matchups. One of the things that strikes me about it is that Golden State, they're on an 8-year run. This is their 6th final. Curry's 34, Draymond Green's 32, Clay's 32. These guys were 24 and 26 when they started their run and won their first championship. That is the age of Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So are we witnessing, one team entering their prime and the other one exiting, or is it the final hurrah, so to speak, for Golden State?
Right.
Golden State has, 3 great scorers with Thompson, Poole, and Curry. Boston really only can answer with 2. But there is redundancy with Golden State's form of scoring. Those guys are all 3-point shooters. And Boston has the slashers with Brown and Tatum and the height, So that, it's really hard to weigh it out. But finally, I think if you really, what's going to be the difference? It's got to be Nick Stauskas. Stauskas being on the Celtic bench, I think, is going to prove the difference. I'm going with Boston.
It's funny you bring up Jordan Poole, in that I watched his career at the University of Michigan, and I thought, nice player, don't know if he's going to have a long NBA career. And he snuck into the end of the first round when he came out of Michigan early, and was drafted by the Warriors. And now he is looking like an absolute impact stud player. The change I've seen in Poole has been absolutely amazing, and it's a big reason why the Warriors are where they're at.
For sure. And if you look at Poole's rookie numbers, he seemed like a candidate to be a guy who would very good. And then this year he's been great. Yeah. So, yeah, there are many nights he's their top guy.
Yeah.
We are not watching top-level Clay and Curry. This is not – they're playing at a level below that. So, don't get confused by the names, They definitely have their moments for sure. All three of those guys are capable of exploding, but they do it with less frequency, Curry and Clay. So that's something to watch. I think another thing to watch, too, I think the key guy in this series is going to be Andrew Wiggins.
Yeah.
I always say to myself.
That's what Coach said. That's what Coach Ray Scott said.
Yes, it is. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Wiggins, I always say to myself, the great Andrew Wiggins, number one pick in the draft. He was so ballyhooed. And, in my mind, he's been a disappointment, But, he's had a decent career. He's played 8 years now. He's always been a starter, never gets hurt. But, he's athletic enough to neutralize Brown or Tatum. And if he can neutralize one of those two guys and stop them on offense, it seems like Golden State's got the edge, And then, the scoring, he's not, he has his moments now and then. But if he gets going on offense, forget it, because they've already got the trio of Poole, Curry, and Clay. Mm-hmm. So I think, so the question, is this going to be his moment to finally shine and silence people, silence the critics who still murmur about him? And don't be fooled about his all-star appearance this year. That was a ballot stuffing. He did not deserve to be in that game. Mm-hmm. So anyway, but that's the challenge for Golden State. How are they going to match up to those two guys, Brown and Tatum?
No, you mentioned the run. You mentioned the run that the Warriors are on. And by the way, that run that you're talking about includes a team 50s or so. So they've been able to – they fell apart and put the pieces back together. Granted, that 15 and 50s was largely because of an injury to Curry. But are we going to see that again? I mean, in today's game – where you've been on this program before. You've talked a lot about, contracts and getting guys on their, when they've got the highest value and so for the people moving around the league so much. Is this a very unusual thing?
Well, what we're looking at now, these are not super teams. Both of these teams are not super dominant like we've seen from other champions in the past. You look at how were these two teams formed. Golden State basically has their core three guys for the same, 8 or 10 years in his 14th year now.
Mm-hmm.
Came out of the draft, and that made Golden State unique 8 years ago that they won a championship with a team that they essentially drafted, and they were fairly young. And then this Boston core was drafted, Tatum, Brown, Marcus Smart,
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a super team. So it looks like, the collective bargaining agreement has created this sort of scenario where, teams are going to get to the top this way. Can there be super teams, that are great for a long time? Yeah, I guess so. But, maybe Detroit's on that way. We got Cade. Just got to get two more, and then those guys can play together for 10 years,
We're talking with Siddy Hall, our NBA stats guru here on the Knee Jerks. I'm Greg Eaton from my WordPress Out of Bounds blog, and Big Al, of course, here as well. And before I let you go, I want to ask you, because you do this, you're so in tune with the numbers, and we're talking about Curry kind of tangentially. Is he the best shooter in NBA history by your measure?
Undoubtedly. Yeah, without a doubt. He's put up, the way I measure the numbers, he's had the greatest season, the greatest scoring season in NBA history. I have measurements for like what I call, big major explosions, like 2 different levels. They're like explosions and then gigantic explosions. He has the most in NBA history by far, and he's still not done.
What's an explosion? Define explosion for us in your mind.
Well, it's just, about how many scoring compared to shots taken,
okay.
And, like, let's look at it this way. I mean, if you were going to compare it to, say, like baseball, if you say, like, how many games does a guy have, like, 3 total bases or more? That would be like a mini explosion, maybe. Maybe that's one way to looking at it. And then how many of those games is it 6 total bases or more? Okay. That would be like a bigger explosion, right? So in that sense, if you transfer that idea to basketball, those big explosions, Steph Curry has the most in NBA history, and it's not close. That's the power of the three-pointer.
Siddy, before we let him. The power of the three-pointer, yeah, absolutely. Al, what you got for Siddy before we let him?
If I was a betting man, should I put money on the Warriors or I put my money on the Celtics? Bottom line, who are you picking? And how many games?
Especially given the lines that Vegas is making, I notice Vegas is favoring Golden State, so I would go Boston on that. I like Boston.
How many games?
But it's a really, really close matchup, There's no obvious favorite. But I like Boston. Stay living and dying by the 3.
Yep.
So we'll see how that works.
You like both?
Yeah, let's start wrapping things up because the connection is getting rough again. So.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for having me on the show. And as far as what you just said, I mean, with the way they play each other game after game after game, these series get physical. They see so much of each other that the game gets gummed up.
Right.
So we'll see how that works out.
Right.
All right. Well, happy anniversary, 13 years.
Friend,
congratulations.
Thank you.
Lucky 13.
Appreciate it. Thanks for helping us celebrate it. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Looking forward to the next time.
And we're back, and I apologize for the choppiness of the interviews, but as you can tell, we were having some connection issues during that. But hopefully, I will have cleaned those up enough to make them listenable enough to where you got the gist of everything. And Greg, the coach is a published author, and he's doing a second book. That's but then again, he's lived like 3 lifetimes worth of adventures compared to the rest of us. I'm sure he's probably just scratching the surface of things he could cover in a series of books.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that he was going to do a book about boxing of all things. And, clearly an aficionado there. So we'll see how many more books he pumps out after this one.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, and Siddy, of course, with his take. And what did you think about his proposal for a revamped playoff system?
You know what? His take sounds like someone who lives out of the country and has been exposed to the round robin type stuff you will see in like soccer and rugby, cricket, and that kind of thing. That would never ever fly here in the States for numerous reasons. I think specifically television, and I just couldn't see them moving around the country as much as it would take to do a round robin playoff. When especially for TV. 5 and 7 game series are perfect because they get to stay in one place for for sometimes a week at a time, and so it's an interesting thought. And I could see a tournament like they've talked about midseason tournaments and things like that, or even the play-in maybe like that. But for the full playoff series, interesting theory and interesting take. But I think in a real life application, I think it would be just too difficult, too big of a change for the NBA, and even more so for the fans, because we know how fans despise change, Greg.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
But still, it's he did open my eyes a little bit, realizing that, thinking about it, Golden State really did have a far easier trip to the finals than the Celtics. So the Celtics are definitely, at least this season, more battle tested.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So with that, anything we're going to save our Tigers talk for the next podcast because I'm on a time crunch. I'm flying out of the state early in the morning, and actually Greg is flying to Florida not too much longer after me as well. It's funny. We're going to be we're back in the same state together, out of state. What the hell? Even though I'm going to visit family and Greg's going on business, so we have two different agendas going on. But regardless of all that, we will be back together 2 weeks from now to talk. Well, that's when we'll do some Tigers talk because we have a lot to say when it comes to I think Javi Baez and what's going on with the Tigers, especially. And now that the Tigers' playoff hopes, which were very, very high to start the season, at the very least contending for the playoffs, now if you look at FanGraphs and Baseball Reference, the chances of them making the playoffs are infinitesimal, under 1%. But we'll talk about that on the next show. So before we sign out, Greg, anything you'd like to add, and then we can get to the thank yous and the credits and all that fun stuff.
No, just that it's been so much fun to do this with you, and these 2 weeks that go by in between shows always go by so fast. And 13 years is nothing to sneeze at. We were talking with Coach Scott about how we didn't start podcast, we didn't start the concept of podcasting, but we were
early adopters, as they say.
Yeah, way sooner than a lot of folks, did, and that's fine. And we're still doing it, and
we started because we just didn't want to type so much.
Right. And we just, we have so much, we're in a city with 4 teams, so there's always something to talk about. And so that helps. And the fact that we, have this kind of odd relationship where it's just strictly online and so forth, but it's still no less close.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Al and I know what's going on in each other's lives. We always chat before each program and how you doing, what's going on. So it's not like we're strangers. That's for sure.
Yeah,
so,
and plus there's always Facebook where I can see what Greg's eating on pretty much a nightly basis.
Right.
So.
Right. So I just want to mention that. I also can never leave out my wife, Miss Zeno Sharonino,
exactly.
who puts up with this stuff every other week. She's been doing it for 13 years, and where would we be without a good woman in our life? And and she's mine, and I love her very much, and I can't imagine a life without her. So I just want to thank her, of course, and my daughter Nicole, who also has to put up with this stuff every other week by virtue of living with us. So thank you, Big Al, for making Tuesday nights so gosh darn fun, and let's go for season number 14.
You forgot someone.
Bean.
Exactly.
Little Bean.
Yeah, he is really the star of your Facebook. Honestly, it's the Bean Show, especially your wife.
That's true.
Yeah, especially your wife's Facebook. It's all Bean all the time, essentially. So he needs his own Instagram or something. See if you can get Bean to go viral. But yes, anyway, yes. Thanks. I appreciate all the kind words, Greg. It's been a lot of fun. Like I said, we wouldn't do this as long as we've had, and all the hassles that go along with it. Because trust us, it's sometimes the hassles do kind of bleed into our show, as you can tell sometimes. But we wouldn't deal with all that if we weren't enjoying ourselves and having fun, and didn't like each other. So it's been a fun 13 years. Headaches at times, but mostly on the technical side, because we've been through so many different formats and services we've used and ways we've done this show. We used to do it live, and hell, we used to do it live at damn near midnight. When we first started doing this, but our lives were in a completely different place back then, which says volumes,
Right.
So that was like the one time we could do it way back in the day. So, but yeah, and also I want to give a shout out. Hell, I'm on my second relationship since this podcast has started. But I've been with Linda now almost 10 years, so it's and she is, I want to really give a shout out there. She's had the roughest 3 years of any of us because she's an ER nurse, and the pandemic has been hell for her. And she is still dealing with it on a damn near nightly basis. So actually, lucky for her, she's off. When I'm going to Florida, she's going to Texas. So I'm going to see my parents. She's going to see her grandkids. And actually, she's going down because she's babysitting because her son and daughter-in-law are going to Cancun. So the excuse is, come see the grandkids. Oh, by the way, can you babysit for a long weekend? So, but she puts up with our shenanigans as well. But with that, before we sign off, Greg, can you give us any leads? Do you have any? Because you usually surprise me when you say, "Oh, by the way, we might be having so-and-so on the show." So, do you have anything on tap, or is it you gonna kind of hold it close to the vest?
The only thing, well, nothing really on tap. I mentioned Kenny Cal will be on with us.
Yes, that's right. Kenny Cal next month. About 2 months from now, July.
That's not till July.
Right.
Nothing set up yet for the June 14th program, but I'll keep you updated. And I do intend to have somebody with us. So we'll see who it is.
Oh, all right. I'll be on pins and needles. On the edge of my seat. With a suntan, hopefully. Then again, it would figure, as I'm watching the weather reports, that there's a hurricane might be headed to Florida by over the weekend, even though hopefully it'll be going south, so I should be fine. So by the time Greg gets down here, it'll be nice, sunny, and hot. But regardless of all that, we need to start wrapping it up because I have a podcast to edit, Greg's got a gin and tonic to drink, and I got a flight to catch. So here's to another year of podcasting, Greg, and hopefully the next one is as eventful as the previous 13. So I guess we'll see you in 2 weeks. So until that time, we'll have some Tigers talk. We'll have some hopefully we'll have I have more of an idea what the Pistons are going to do with the draft. And who the hell knows? Oh, and, of course, the Red Wings, Greg, because, there's Barry Trotz rumors still flying around. So we may have to talk about that as well. So we'll have lots to talk about on the next show. So until that time, this is Al Beaton saying good evening, good luck, and aloha, and happy anniversary.
Hello, everybody, and happy anniversary. You'll see you in 2 weeks.